much for coming. My name is Francisco Salazar, and this is my presentation of learning. I came into the trip eager to travel around the world and make meaningful connections with people different from me. I was ready to explore the world which I one day wished to serve, as I wrote in one of my application essays. I was ready to leave the dusty textbook methodology behind and get a first-hand experience of how the world actually works. Because you see, it is one thing to hear and read about an ex-child soldier for the Cambodian Communist Regiment, and it's another for him personally to tell you how his first girlfriend was an assault rifle. I knew the world was much more than what I knew, and I was desperate to discover it. I always felt the social bubble in which I lived in back home was far too small or far too perfect for my liking, so I signed up for Thinking Beyond Borders. In this gap year with TBB, I had to get lost in order to find myself. I knew it would not help to not only be away physically, but also mentally. In order to see the bigger picture, it was necessary to take a step back and breathe. It is quite hard to be introspective, to focus on the present, or scrolling through Instagram and looking for the golden light for selfie. Hashtag into the wild. Hashtag gap year. So I was very selective on my media time, trying to keep a balance between being present and being detached from my home. I think I did a pretty good job at calling once a week, but if you ask my mother, she'll probably answer differently. Before I left, my grandmother, Paola, told me that this trip would change my life. She said that this would open my eyes to the world, and that this would happen by connecting with people completely different from me. So I did my best. I went out. I sought for these meaningful connections. I loved losing myself in whatever community we found ourselves in. If I could summarize my gap year, it would be through stories, faces, and lessons. Months later, I found out that there was a recurring joke among the group that if I was nowhere to be found, I must have been out making new friends. The buddy system rule didn't really apply to me. I made and created a bond with different people along the way, and I believe that from every one of them, I learned something. People come and go in our lives. I believe that it is the lessons we take from them that matter the most. The little rays of light shine through us. But with all of these things happening, these small conversations, there was something slowly cooking in the back of my mind. It was a process which took time. And little experiences facilitated this continuous development. I think it's what some people call personal growth. In Guatemala, while I could hear my peers singing La Cucaracha and La Bamba in Spanish class, I was learning Sutuhil, one of the 21 official dialects in Guatemala, with a teacher whom I called Keo. Every now and then, I would be able to divert our Sutuhil classes away from nouns and verbs into mind philosophy. We talked about culture, traditions, language, and opportunities. But we talked most passionately about politics and corruption. And through our lessons, he told me his story. At age 9, he taught himself how to speak English by listening and asking tourists. He became the first licensed tour guide of the region and painted in his free time. At age 20, the tourist he was working for became fascinated with his work and bought all his paintings for 8 times the amount he was asking for. He pointed out that he could have moved out of his small rural house and built a mansion like the ones the corrupt mayors of his town had done. But instead, he paid off the bank debts of multiple families in his community who were in peril of losing their house. He built a Spanish school for foreigners, started a small organic coffee plantation, and continued painting more seriously now. People in his community looked up to him, and he looked after them. He incentivized children to stay in school and teachers to build relationships with their students. He became the voice of the people. He became an agent of change. We talked about the characteristics of a good politician, the importance of preparation, creativity, but most importantly, humility. He had international art expositions. He had been able to escape the poverty trap, yet he presented himself quietly and kindly. I learned about the importance of acknowledging privilege, but remaining grounded. He later admitted, drawing me closer, in a whispered tone, that people in San Juan were asking him to run for mayor in the upcoming elections in August. To take down the corrupt political party and set things straight, he feared for his life. He said that he had been receiving threats from powerful people to either join them or stay away. On the final days of our conversations, he told me he refused to be oppressed by the corrupt, that he will fight for what he believes in order to set an example for his son. The humility I saw in Keo stayed with me throughout the rest of the trip. I remember the most vividly while doing my project in Guatemala with Naomi and Zach, about love and happiness. We went out into Tecpan and interviewed community members from all ages and sexes. Our research question was, what do the words love and happiness mean to the people of Tecpan? Regardless of my mediocre Spanish, I was set as the interviewer, and I was able to have conversations with the community. Here's an extract of my personal reflection. After completing this project, I can say that I have learned more about the meaning of love and happiness, words which I thought I knew quite well what they represented. Tecpan, as covered by a clash between two cultures as it may seem, is a place where love is understood to be rough around the edges, where happiness is strived for every day, but its absence is not considered a printing error, but rather a small price to pay in order to appreciate happiness better. Where families don't turn their back on each other on tough times, where they come closer when times are rough and provide a safe space for talking. That is love and happiness. In Thailand, my media project with Zach and Molly Fox revolved around Buddhism. I went to go out, explore temples, talk to monks, and meditate. This became the perfect excuse to use work time in order to leave the home days. The monks we interviewed told us their stories. They introduced the concept of the Eightfold Path, the Buddhist version of how to be closer to enlightenment for dummies. The first two concepts of the Eightfold Path, right view and right intention, stuck with me. They talked about being conscious of our motivations, assumptions, and emotions. I learned about the importance of assessing my surroundings, connecting with my feelings, and reflecting on how my personal experiences growing up shaped who I am and how I think. This process was particularly hard because I didn't want to acknowledge the people close to me back home and made me less tolerant, more impulsive, and more critical people. But such process was necessary in order to be aware of my emotions and of who I want to be. I started to understand more clearly what I was feeling, what was making me feel like that, and to express my emotions. This became helpful when in December, my great-grandmother, Mami, my role model and fiercest chess opponent, became ill. I talked with my family and leaders, and they gave me the option to leave the trip for a couple of days in order to say what it would most likely be my final goodbye. I wanted someone to tell me what to do, but it was up to me, not anyone else. I felt like it was my duty to be there for my family, but what I was doing in Thailand was for my personal growth, and interrupting it felt unwise. At the end, I decided that Mami would have wanted me to stay, to connect with people around me the same way she did as a teacher. She passed away the day before Christmas, and a grief which I would have once held to myself, I shared. Now you see, back home I struggled with bottling up my emotions, like airing a balloon, as my father would wisely point out. But here, I was able to ask for support. Kelly, Isaac, and Molly Herring were there for me. Like I mentioned in my journal entry, I was able to find space, a safe space free of judgment. In this trip with them, they became my confidence and my conscience, giving place to work on my communication and personal reflection. Kelly and Isaac were there for us every step of the way. They guided us through ups and downs, bumps and crashes, headaches, and excessive fluid valve release, to say the least. Especially Isaac. They never imposed a lesson, nor forced us to see our mistakes. They simply asked the right questions. They always showed us different sides of the story and incentivized us to go out and explore and discover it ourselves. Their presence was not that of parents, even though we were not shy of calling them mother and father. They were our friends when we needed a good laugh, a mentor when we needed advice, and leaders when we needed a hand. Finally, Boone. He was another person from whom I learned how to deal with my emotions. He was our tour guide during our stay in Cambodia. Something that impressed me from Boone, well, he was very talkative, maybe too talkative after a long trip from traveling between Thailand and Cambodia, was the constant smile that spread across his face. After coming with us everywhere, we were curious why he hadn't joined us to visit the killing fields, a historical landmark of the place where the Khmer Rouge would send people to be executed. He revealed that when he was 4 years old, this communist party took over Cambodia. They evacuated everyone from the cities and murdered anyone whom they considered intellectual or spiritual. His family was separated. He was given an AK-47 and forced to join the ranks. Up until age 20, he knew no other life than that of a child soldier obeying orders blindly. When the government fell, his reality was demolished and his mind was restless with regret. His life took a massive turn. He joined a Buddhist monastery where he spent the next 2 years meditating, reflecting, and healing. After enrolling in order to take care of his mother and brothers, he became a tour guide and later built a school in his backyard for the children to study English in an attempt to keep them away from drugs and prostitution that thrive in a country struggling to rebuild itself without a generation of teachers, doctors, or lawyers. He is changing their future. He is their agent of change. He took us to the historical landmarks that defined the darkest years of his life. He did not let his past mistakes rule who he was in the present. He was Boone. From Boone, I learned about resilience. No matter how tough life gets, he would always keep going. Stories like him made me question my complaints and struggles. From him, I learned about the power that introspection and self-reflection could have, about changing what doesn't suit you, about not getting stuck in the past, about making a difference no matter how big or how small it may seem. To conclude, I would like to say that when taking on a gap year as such, you must be prepared to be wrong, to have your assumptions challenged and debated. Not only about the world around us, but also about yourself. During guided self-reflection the first week of the trip, I knew there were certain aspects of my life which I wanted to change. I wanted to be less impulsive, to be more meditative, to be more connected with my emotions, and to communicate more easily about these. From Kelly and Isaac, I learned about the power of vulnerability and communication. From Kale, I learned about the importance of humility when connecting with people. From Boone, I learned about how much resilience and character can change a person's life. But from myself, I learned that I had it in me to explore, learn, and change. I would like to thank the people with whom I was able to connect during this amazing journey. This includes leaders, each and every student with whom I spent time, and acquaintances. Without you, this would not have been possible. Thank you very much. Q&A time? Yes, thanks.
I just want to say, I know you did not have an option in doing the POL, but even still, I'm so very impressed that you were so confident in standing up in front of this group and giving a speech in your non-native language. Snaps for you.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
What are your future plans?
Well, for the next 6 months, I'm going to head back to Colombia, and I'm going to be working on my organic mango farm. And then after that, I'll be traveling to Boston with where Isaac's going to be waiting for me, and I'm going to start college in Tufts University with Naomi, who's not here. But, yeah.
Congrats.
Thank you very much. Yes, Daniel.
How do you see your relationship with Colombian culture changing as a result of this experience?
Throughout planning my presentation of learning, there were many things which I wanted to talk about, and I think one of them was empathy, and I believe that's something that maybe certain people around my life in Colombia are missing because I believe Colombia is a place that's very divided. it's always me against you, and if you don't see it or you don't experience it, you don't relate to it. I think people should be more open towards stretching a hand out to people who seem very far away from you, who you do not connect with or don't have anything similar with. But I very much look forward to changing that in the future. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh,
One last one.
Isaac?
We've talked a little bit about code switching, but I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about what it was like to be the only international student in this group of crazy Americans. Together for a while.
Yeah, you know, I learned a lot about I think myself, and when you're in a place where everyone's further differently from you, you learn about your behaviors and the way you're interacting with people. I learned that not everyone's open for a hug all the time. I learned that sometimes people burp a lot. But well, what Isaac was talking about was something we talked for a long time. And it was code switching, and it was the concept that when I learned English, it was in school. I addressed it with teachers, professors, and academics, and I learned a sort of language and sort of behavior around English. But with Spanish, it was in my house, where I was more relaxed with my friends, where I would curse. And I saw a struggle between joining these two people in a trip where I spent a lot of time not being able to talk in Spanish. It was a bigger struggle than what I would have thought, to be honest. But I think I've been able to join these two different personas, which I thought I had in a moment, and find out who I really was, not changing myself in order to suit connections with other people, but finding who I was. Thank you. That.
So Fran, I found very interesting and touching the experience with Kale. And you mentioned two words, the poverty trap. Can you elaborate on that? Like, why did you came up with those two words in your speech?
Well, something we talked about during our seminars with Kelly and Isaac was poverty, the ongoing cycle, and how people are trapped into believing that they cannot escape it, following traditions of agriculture. Cayo's dad, he was, well, they're all descendants from the Mayans, and they're imposed class. Their mentality was to always grow corn, and that's what he always thought. And he decided to leave this ongoing cycle of just doing this and finding out who he was by himself. He did not have any sort of formal schooling or education. Everything he learned was from his dad, and he decided to leave this by his own account, by his own decisions. Thank you very much.